Hi, Sean. I hope you're doing well. I wanted to send you a recording of some information from chapters 4 and 5 of our book, A Long Walk to Water. And there's a couple things I want to go over real quick before I get into chapter 4. Remember, the author is Linda Sue Park, and last week when we met, we went over who Linda was. We went over where this setting is for A Long Walk to Water, which is in southern Sudan. And we've got the theme, and I don't know if you remember the theme or not, but if you look at our paper handout that I gave you, and think about what Salva is going through, the theme is never give up. One of the themes is never give up. Stories can have several different themes in them, and that's fine. But again, it's taking place in southern Sudan. And our main characters we have are Salva Dutt and Naya. And remember, each chapter starts with Naya and her story, and then we have Salva's story. And Salva's story is the writing that is in black, and Naya's story is the writing that's in brown. I don't know what color that is. I'm just going to say brown. And her story takes place in 2008, while Salva's takes place in 1985. And if you remember, with Naya, she is traveling to a pond, and what is she going to get? She's going to get water. She's getting water for her family, and she has to walk pretty far to get to where the watering pond is, and she's got a container, and when she gets there, she takes a couple of gourds and gourd bowls and takes a couple of drinks of this water before filling her container and placing it on top of her head and walking her journey back home with this container of water. Do you remember what happened to her last week in the first 3 chapters as she was walking? She got a thorn in her foot, because remember, they don't have shoes that protect their feet like we do. And so as she's walking, she gets this thorn in her foot, and so it makes her foot sore. And then after she gets her water and she's heading home, which is already a tiring um, thing to do, she's got this sore foot as well, which makes her take even longer to get home. So that's where we are with Naya. Now with Salva, remember, he's at school, and while he's at school, they hear some noise, and it's gunfire. And so the teacher tells them to run to the bush, don't come back, don't go home, run. And it's because there's a war going on, and the northern Sudanese people are attacking the southern people of Sudan. And do you remember why? It's because of their beliefs. Remember, the northern Sudan people were Muslim, and they wanted the southern Sudan people to be Muslim as well. And so they were trying to overpower them and force them into Islam. And so here you have Salva, and he's on the run, and he is with some people, and they end up leaving him alone in the night while he's sleeping. And he's just a young boy of about the age of 11, I think, if I remember right. And he is now all alone, and he finds this lady in chapter 3. He finds this lady who lets him stay with her, and he helps her. And while he is helping her, she feeds him, gives him a place to stay, but eventually she needs to leave her home as well because of the war. And she tells Salva he cannot travel with her. He will cause her to, have more issues while she traveled, because if she's got this young boy with her. And so she has to say goodbye to him as well. that puts us at chapter 4. Um, on your worksheet, I didn't have any terms for chapter 4. We had some terms for chapter 1 and 2, the refugee, droned, aimless, hesitate, scurry, and protested. And so consider what all these words are. And remember, this is a biography about Dutt, sorry, about Salva Dutt and his story of his travels. And so this is a true story. These were things that people went through. Something else I want to remind you about are the two tribes that we were looking at, the Dinka tribe and the Nuer tribe. And Dinka is Salva's tribe, and Nuer is Naya's tribe. And they were at war over land pretty much, because there's this nice big lake that during the wet season will provide plenty of water, but the Dinkas and the Nuers cannot agree on who the lake belongs to and what land around the lake who that belongs to. And of course they both say it belongs to each one. The Dinkas think it belongs to the Dinkas, and the Nuers think that it belongs to the Nuers. And so they regularly fight one another, and people are killed because this is their source of water. They don't have anything else. And so it's important that they have control of that water and have access to the water, or else they'll die. So they fight to death on this, and it's a very sad time for these people as they have nothing else. Now we get a little bit more information in chapter 4. Just in case, if you have not read chapter 4, I'm going to pause for a second and give you the opportunity to just pause the video and read chapter 4, and then restart the video once you've finished reading it, and I'll talk about it a little bit as we go. So go ahead and pause the video now if you have not already read chapter 4. Okay, so with chapter 4, we have the start of Naya's story, just like in chapters 1 through 3. And again, this is Southern Sudan in 2008. Now, Naya has been to the pond. This is not the big lake where the Dinkas and the Nuers fight over. This is a pond that they travel to throughout the year when it's the wet season, and there's water is a little more abundant, but it's not close by. Naya has to walk a while, and so she has gone in the first 3 chapters. She has gone to the pond and she's returned home. For in chapter 4, she's home and she has her container full of water, and her mom is able to pour that one container and have 3 large jars of water. And so while she's doing that, Naya's eating food. She is able to enjoy some food that is there prepared for her and a little milk. She sits outside in the shade and she's eating. And it says that when she was done, she took the bowl back inside, and her mother tells her to take Akir. And this is Naya's younger sister. And so Akira is not somebody that Naya wants to travel with to the pond, because Akira is younger and smaller, so she's going to cause some delay for Naya. And if you look on page 20, let me see if I can get this. It says that Naya glanced at her younger sister. She did not say what she was thinking, that Akir, who was only 5 years old, was too small and walked too slowly. So she doesn't say that, but it appears her mother realizes that she's thinking this, and so she says, well, she needs to learn Akir needs to be taught how to go to the pond and retrieve the water and bring it home. And so then it says that Naya was home for just long enough to eat. Naya would now make her second trip to the pond and back, to the pond and back, nearly a full day of walking altogether. This was Naya's daily routine for 7 months of the year. So for 7 months, every single day, daily, she walked to the pond, filled the container 3 times, and brought it home. So there's no time for school for Naya. There's no time. They are just trying to live. And so that's the start of chapter 4 with Naya. Then we get to on page 21 where we hear about Selva's story for this chapter. And he has found at the end of chapter 3, he sees this group of people, because remember he's all alone, and then he sees this group of people and they have the V-shaped scars on their forehead, and he knows that that's a Dinka pattern. And so this Dinka pattern was given to boys in his village once they became a man. So when he sees this pattern, he knows these people are part of his village. And so he's kind of excited because his family could be there. And so what he does is he looks, and he's looking at each person one by one. And does he see anybody from his family? No. It says here, strangers, no one from his family. So there's some discouragement and disappointment that he feels at that point. And then these people see him and they're not real sure about him either, because here's this strange person, and really honestly it's another mouth to feed, and they don't have any food as it is, and it's just one more person that is going to possibly take away from the resources that they have. But this older lady is still with him, and she says that this one is alone. Will you take him with you? So I kind of like that she is at least trying to make sure that he has some help from others, and she didn't just abandon him. But something that Salva is experiencing is that it says that Salva saw doubt on the people's faces. So he realizes nobody wants him. And so here's why. Here's what they say as to why they don't really feel like Salva should join them, even though they're Dinkas. He is a child. He will slow us down. And that mimics what Naya sees about Akira, her younger sister. She's younger. She's going to slow her down. So you have some parallel story structures going on here. But he is a child. He will slow us down. And someone else says, another mouth to feed. It is already hard enough to find food. So not only will he slow them down, but it's somebody else who's going to be taking the food they have. And then someone else chimes in saying another reason why they don't want Salva to join their group is that he is too young to do any real work. He'll be of no help to us. So he's too young, he'll slow them down. He's another mouth to feed, and he can't do much work to help them. So they don't see a lot of advantages to Salva joining their group. I'm sorry, I think I should be on this slide. One of the things, okay, so for this picture here, the gourd for water, this is something that the lady gives him when she lets him go, or is leaving him. She gives him a gourd for water. And so I don't know that this is exactly what it looks like, but this would kind of act as a cup. So this is dried out gourd, and it allows them to put water in there and drink it. There's uncertainty, and that uncertainty comes from these people who are Dinkas and who don't really want to bring Salva with them. But then we see kindness. And kindness is found on page 22 because there's a lady in the group of Dinkas, and she reaches out and she touches the arm of one of the men. She says nothing, but she looks first at the man and then she looks at Salva. And the man understands what she is saying, and he turns to the group and says, "We will take him." And that's on the top of page 22. So Salva looks up quickly. A few in the group were shaking their heads and grumbling. The man shrugged. "He is Dinka," he said, and began walking again. So here he finds some kindness and some belongings. And it's because he's Dinka that they accept him in, and that's really the only reason. And this is the old woman. She gives Salva a bag of peanuts and a gourd for drinking the water. We talked about the gourd already. And if you look here on the middle, kind of lower middle of the page 22, it says he knew only that they were Dinka and that they were trying to stay away from war. And that's good enough for him. It's not his family, but at least he has somebody who would be familiar to him. And so that's a comfort to him. But as they go, it says the days became a never-ending walk. So they just get up and they walk every single day, and they're just walking. Where it says on page 23, they were walking to nowhere. And they're just trying to get away from where the war is and where the battle is. We see on page 23, hold on, give me a second. Okay, so we see on page 23 that he comes across somebody, and the guy tells him his name is Buksa, and he's of the Jur Chol tribe, and so this is another group of people, and says Salva didn't know much about him except that his name was Buksa. And as they walked along, Buksa slowed down, and so Salva stops with him, and Buksa is kind of acting strange. But what he does is he's listening, and then he says he hears something, and he says, "Go get the other people." So it says that Buksa cocked his head and furrowed his brow, listening, and they stood motionless. I think I need to erase these things. Hold on. This is new for me, Sean, so you have to bear with me just a little bit. But so he cocked his head and he furrowed his brow and he's listening. And then he says, "Ah," a slow smile spread over his face. "There, you hear?" And Salva doesn't hear anything, but Buksa does. And he says, go call the others. And Salva says, "But what shall I tell them?" And the bird, the one I was listening to, he led me right here. And he says, "You see that?" And he points up into the branches of the tree, and he says, "There's a beehive, a fine, large beehive." And so what do bees make? They make honey, right? And so there's a honeycomb, so there's sustenance there for them. There's nourishment that they're going to be able to eat, and that's going to help them have energy and renew them. And so it says at the end of page 25, it says, "Honey, this night they would feast." So this is a very positive way to kind of end this chapter. For Salva, he's going to be excited about this honey. Okay, and so then we have the start of chapter 5. And again, we're starting with Naya in southern Sudan. And it tells us a little bit something different than what we've been hearing. We've been hearing about this travel to the pond. But now Naya has, we're going to hear the story about the big lake. And it says that the big lake is 3 days walk from Naya's village. And so, hold on, I don't know if it'll let me go back. I think I messed that one up. Hold on, I'm going to try something. Okay, it's not going to let me go back, so I apologize. But I'm going to talk about Naya still a little bit more. So this 3 days walk. Her tribe, the Newers, this is where we see a little bit that they fight. The rival Dinka tribe over the land surrounding the lake. 5 months of the dry season is the only time when the village lives near the lake. So Naya and her family will move closer to the lake 5 months out of the dry season, because the ponds are going to be dried up even more than they already are, and they're not going to be able to get water from there. And you have to have water to live. You can go without food, but you cannot go without water. So they have to move closer to the lake. And there's 5 months of the dry season, it says, when both tribes were so busy struggling for survival that the fighting occurred far less often. They're still fighting, but they're really just mainly concerned at that point of getting water. So then it says, like the pond back home, the lake was dried up, but because it was much bigger than the pond, the clay of the lake bed still held water. So she goes in and she digs and she digs and she digs until she gets to where it's kind of a wet area, and then the water will fill into that hole. Kind of like if you go to the beach and you can dig into the sand, and eventually water will just start coming up from the ground into the hole you've dug and fill it a little bit. But what would be a problem with this water that's coming up out of the ground in the mud? Well, it's dirty water, right? So on page 27, it says the water that filled the hole was filthy, more mud than liquid. So they're drinking to get their hydration and to refresh themselves. They're drinking mud for the most part. But it says at the end of Naya's part, waiting for water here for hours at a time, and every day for 5 long months until the rains came and she and her family could return home. Because once the rains come, they can go home and those ponds will have some water for them. And so that's where we leave Naya. Now if you look at Salva's part of chapter 5, this portion was a little bit longer than the other chapters we are reading. But it starts out with his satisfaction. Salva has satisfaction, and where did he get that satisfaction? From the honey, right? There were bee stings, and so this is where it starts out. Salva's eyes was swollen. He had an eye that was swollen shut from being stung by the bee. And Buxa's forearms were lumpy and raw. A friend of Buxa's had a fat lip. They all looked as though they had been in a terrible fist fight. And this picture here is not of anybody in particular. It's just one I found online. But there were injuries. Their injuries weren't bruises, they were bee stings. So it's kind of a comical picture we can get right here, where they're swollen and, just injured from these bee stings, but yet they're very happy because their bellies are full. But there's one guy who is not quite so happy, because if you look on page 28, it says all around him. Let me change this here. It says, all around him people were licking their fingers in great satisfaction, except for one Dinka man who had been stung on his tongue. It was swollen so badly that he could not close his mouth. He could hardly swallow. So this poor guy's watching everybody eat, and he can't even enjoy his honey. But at the top we see it was worth it. These bee stings were worth getting that honey. And when Salva had eaten as much as he could hold and a little more, he's content. And we see here they get back to walking, and it says the walking seemed easier now. They're not in as much of a struggle, they have some energy from this honey. Okay, and so then if you look on page 29, Salva's joined the group and he's going around the fireside like he does every night, and he's looking at every face because each day more people are coming into their group. And so he's looking at every person in the hope of seeing a familiar one. He wants to see a familiar face. And so he's still looking for his family. But he ends up stepping on the hand of somebody who is there on the ground. And the boy jumps up and he says, "Hey, that was my hand you stepped on." And Salva steps back and he's like, "I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" And the boy's like, "It's okay. It's fine. But you need to watch where you're going." So Salva apologizes again. But then they both realize neither one of them have family there. And they're about the same age. And so when the boy asks him if he has family, Salva shakes his head no, and the boy says, "Me too." He sighed, and Salva heard that sigh all the way to his heart. So you see this idea that he's got a friend now who is going through the same thing as he is, and he's going to understand where he's coming from. This guy's name is Mariel, and we'll see a little bit more about Mariel in a second. The next morning, they began walking together, and Salva's just asking Mariel, he's like, "Where are we going?" And he says, "Ethiopia." And uh, Salva thinks he can't leave the country. Like, that would be terrible if he leaves the country. His family is still in southern Sudan. So if he leaves, how are they going to find him? And so on page 30, we see where he says, "I can't go to another country. If I do, my family will never find me." So that's a big fear for him. Um, but he has a friend, and this friend is someone who helps the days go by faster for him, and helps make it a little more enjoyable. If you look at page 31, it says more than a month had passed since Salva had run from his school into the bush. So they've been traveling for a month. He's been away from his family, hasn't seen anyone in his family, and he's been walking and just trying to survive and stay away from the northern people who are causing problems for the southern Sudan people. And it says the group was now walking in the land of the Atuit people. And this picture that I have here of this young lady is an image of someone that is supposed to be an Atuit woman. And so you can kind of see the markings on her forehead, and they have a V shape marking on them. But the Atuit people are called the people of the lion. And this is because in their area, it's not like where the Dinkas live. Here you have the herds of antelope, you have the gnus, the wildebeest, and lions. And these lions eat meat, right? And so it says that the Dinka told stories about the Atuit, that when a person died, an Atuit person died, he came back to earth as a lion with a great hunger for the human flesh he once had. So the lions in the Atuit region were said to be the fiercest in the world. So they're a little afraid of them. And so the next paragraph said nights became uneasy. Why would they be uneasy? Why would people be scared of the night now? It was because of the lions. They were afraid the lions would take them in their sleep, and the lions could hunt these people, and so they weren't able to sleep well. And this would also cause problem with their walking because they're constantly, walking and moving. So nights became uneasy. Salva woke often to the sound of roars in the distance, and sometimes to the death squeal of an animal under a lion's claws. So that's a little scary for someone who's maybe of 11 years of age. I think it'd be scary for adults as well. So one morning he woke bleary-eyed after a poor sleep. He rubbed his eyes, rose and stumbled after Muriel as they began walking yet again. And if you look at page 32, someone says Salva, so he hears his name. That shows us that someone familiar has seen him because he knows his name. And it says, it was not Muriel who had spoken. The voice had come from behind them. Salva turned, his mouth fell open in amazement, but he could not speak. Salva! So someone has confirmed that they thought they saw Salva, and now they realize this is Salva. And so we'll see in chapter 6 who this person is. And I would say for this week, go ahead and I had a picture of the lion too.